Today's show is brought to you by Woodward, PA. For 55 years, Woodward has been one of the largest overnight camps in the world. They say over 200,000 kids have had the summer of a lifetime at Woodward, PA. Woodward, PA is an overnight summer camp for ages 7 to 17, 9 weeks to choose from. Programs include skateboarding, mountain bikes, scooters, BMX freestyle, and race parkour, roller skate, and creative arts. They're located 3 hours from Pittsburgh, so 30 minutes or so from State College, and Woodward is offering $300 off a full week of summer camp for any program. All you have to do is enter the code CITYCAST, all one word, at checkout and get your kid ready for an unforgettable summer. Visit woodwardpa.com. Today's show is supported by the Athens County Visitors Bureau. My better half, some of y'all know this, is a bobcat, so I have spent my share of spring and autumn nights sipping Black Widows at the Pigskin. But when school is out for the summer, Athens County is a totally different vibe. So laid back, same small town, same lush, picturesque hills, but basically no crowds. Think over 100 miles of mountain bike trails, scenic paddling, hiking, and winding back roads you can explore. You can eat local food, catch live music, do some shopping, so much more. I challenge you, go beyond Court Street and visit AthensOhio.com for more information. It's more than a place, it's a place to belong. This is CityCast Pittsburgh. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. Mia, if you could solve one Pittsburgh problem in the next 50 years, what would you choose?
I am a loyal rider of the PRT bus system, so
I know where this is going.
Yeah. I think if I could fix anything, it would be the on-time performance of the bus system. And I know that they are considering limiting the number of stops, but I would love to see it expanded beyond the current scope.
Yeah, I like that. Let's say full funding and opportunity for expansion. I'm just going to jump on yours. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with Mia Hawley, the economic development and housing reporter for Pittsburgh's Public Source. You and I and the folks over at Technically, we have been collaborating on stories for America 250, kind of looking at what Pittsburgh's been and what we want it to be in the future, what folks think it should be or it will be. And you focus on a couple of things. So we're going to start with data centers. If you drive through parts of Western Pennsylvania, what would signal to someone that a data center boom is in fact happening here? Like not just in theory, but physically, even if you're not in this industry.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because data centers do exist in Southwestern PA. Like we have a very small data center in Nova Place on the north side.
Mm-hmm. There's one downtown too that I didn't realize until fairly recently. Like it's in an old historic building. You'd never know.
Right. So it's really, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them in everyday life if they're already there. And even for the larger ones, unless it's just some behemoth facility that has suddenly popped up, I think typically you would just think, oh, this is some kind of industrial warehouse. The way that I like to think about it, or at least what I like to think of as the best signal, is if you're seeing a lot of activity around former power generation sites. So I think a good example is Homer City, where we had this previously operating coal-fired power generation site. It goes offline for a few years. Now, all of a sudden, there's trucks going in and out of there, and residents have been noticing too. And I think in that sense, you can definitely see that happening across Southwestern PA, just a lot more activity at these sites because data center operators want to co-locate their centers with power generation.
Yeah. And I mean, Pittsburgh has this legacy of energy and being involved in that industry. I feel like a lot of folks kind of sleep on that fact because when they think of energy, they think of California or the Midwest with the air turbines, or Texas, of course. So why Pennsylvania? Why Pittsburgh? Like, why are we a good home for this type of thing?
Yeah, well, I think you just said it, power generation.
But it's sleepy. I feel like it's not like we don't advertise the fact that we do this as much as other states do.
Right, which is interesting because, so I think most people know that Virginia is considered the data center capital of the world. And Texas isn't far behind that, due in part to its power generation. Texas generates a lot of power. But so does Pennsylvania. We produce just as much natural gas as Texas for the most part, and we have the highest number of coal-fired power plants that are still in operation across the United States. So we produce a lot of energy here.
I don't think I realized that coal stat. Like when I think of coal, I still think of like West Virginia, which I know is close, but I don't think of us as being number one.
Right. I don't typically think of that either until I did this story and I was like, wow. So I think that is a major reason. I think another major reason is tied to power generation and Southwestern PA's industrial history, which is that we have a lot of brownfield sites. And I do think to an extent that makes us attractive because you're not developing a huge data center on green space or a park. You're saying, oh, hey, let's develop it in Homer City where we already have this huge previously coal-fired power plant or other brownfield sites. And so I think in that way, it's an easier sell, as we've seen, maybe not that much of an easier sell, but nonetheless. And then finally, I think that some of the sources that I spoke to for this story said that this industry is just growing so rapidly. We are beyond the point of just looking at primary markets, which includes Virginia and Texas. We're beyond the point of looking at even secondary markets. Now we're looking beyond the top 10 markets for data centers, and we're going into places like Pennsylvania.
Wait, the subtext of that is that we're very low on someone's list, which in this one instance, I think is maybe a good thing.
Right. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting to see that we're low on the list, and yet there are a lot of projects planned for Pennsylvania.
How many projects would you estimate there are? Because I know like tracking this sort of thing is also remarkably difficult. Like mostly the ones I've seen at least are like kind of homegrown, where it's like an individual who's just really passionate about it. And so they try to keep tabs, but that's a challenge.
Yeah, it is definitely challenging. There are a few sources that have a similar ballpark. I would say that between places that are both planned and fully operating, there are probably between 130 and 150 in the Commonwealth.
And what about here in Western PA? Like, is that a small fraction or are we like more?
There are quite a few smaller data centers in Southwestern PA. We just spoke about a few that are right here in Pittsburgh. I would say in terms of the hyperscale data centers that this story that I worked on mostly focuses on, there are probably about a dozen that are planned. For Southwestern PA.
We'll talk about that hyperscale notion because, I mean, most of the ones that I feel like we're seeing in the news are enormous. What sets apart hyperscale from the type of data center that we've had in Pittsburgh for a long time and it didn't really ruffle as many feathers?
Sure. Typically, when someone is talking about a hyperscale data center, they're talking about one that consumes 100 megawatts of power.
Can you put that in context? Like, I don't have a clue what that means.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. I'd have to look that up later, but
yeah,
it definitely is a lot more power than certainly
any of us use on a daily basis. I mean, what does that mean? Like you use the term power hungry or energy hungry in your story. Like, what does that mean in terms of our local grid, I guess?
Data centers are quote unquote power hungry or energy hungry in part because they're doing a lot of work. And so one of my sources gave the example of back in the day, you would have maybe in your workplace's office, you would have a storage closet and it would have a bunch of servers in there. Now, fast forward to today, data centers, huge behemoth data centers kind of fill that purpose. And not only are they fulfilling the daily activity of us like using the internet, but they're also fulfilling these really complex tasks of AI. And so that is all to say that they have to use a lot of energy in order to get that done. And so that puts a lot of pressure on our grid.
The grid and also water. I mean, I feel like that's usually like a big concern for folks too. And noise pollution, things like that. Like those are the ways that I feel like a lot of us become aware of this thing.
Right, definitely.
Well, so how does all this play into like, say, a clean energy source, for example? Like, I feel like Governor Josh Shapiro has been talking about what does he say? Like all of the above energy that we want to do coal, but also solar, but also wind and natural gas and clean energy. So like how does this affect like kind of that strategy overall?
A lot of the sources that I spoke to interestingly said that at some point, energy resources and water resources will be pushed to their limits. And so when we're talking about mixes of energy production and things like that, I think that inevitably the world and Southwestern PA and PA at large will have to end up producing more clean energy, which would include solar and which would include wind powered generation. And so I think that's how we'll see power generation change over the next maybe 10, 20 years, 150 years, which was the scope of this story.
Yeah. I mean, and even nuclear too, which, like, I mean, I don't know that anybody had waking up 3 Mile Island on their bingo card, Like, that was what a wild thing to think about that, like, one company, Microsoft, could come in and just completely change the trajectory of one of the nation's, maybe the biggest nuclear disaster we've ever had in the US.
Sure, definitely.
So I feel like there is maybe some tension there between, like, this long-term clean energy optimism, but the short-term strain of getting something like a data center off the ground, like getting it going with
Mhm.
power, with water. Where do you see this landing? Like, can people and these centers coexist in the next 10 to 20 years?
I think the sources that I spoke to for this story would say that at least in the next 10 to 20 years, there will be a lot of strain on water and power sources. At the same time, there are advances in chip technology. And so the chips that go into the servers, that go into the data center, there has been advances in making those more energy efficient. There's also been advances in having data centers consume less water as opposed to just consuming it and that's it. They've now found ways to recycle just one instance of water. And I think the Springdale Data Center has proposed just using the amount of an Olympic sized swimming pool as opposed to thousands of gallons of water every day. And so I think I say all of that to say that it will, over the next 10 to 20 years, it will be kind of a mix of strain and finding more efficient uses of this. But as we progress beyond that point, my sources have also said that inevitably there will have to be a push to more efficient uses and more efficient uses of energy as well.
What about, like, the fear of overbuilding? I feel like that always comes up, right? When we're talking about booms, when an industry is really growing. Like, what happens if, especially for like a hyperscale type situation where it is enormous, where it's taking over some huge amount of land and resources? What if 10 years from now, you're like, you know what? Actually, we don't need these many. This is too many. Like, what happens to Pennsylvania then?
Some of the people I spoke to said that the next few decades, at least, will be marked by data centers kind of right sizing their infrastructure. And so these hyperscale data centers have existed in the United States, at least, for a while now. And so I think maybe one of the benefits of Pennsylvania being one of these third level markets is that developers have learned from operating in Virginia, they've learned from operating in Texas. And as this industry develops, I don't think that they'll take the same approach to just plopping hundreds and hundreds of them in Pennsylvania. That's my guess based on the people that I spoke to. And there have also been cases overseas in China, for example, where they've actually slowed down development of data centers. And so, yeah, I think that over time, we won't see the level that we see now. But if there is the case of stranded assets, it will be
Meaning they've had to be abandoned over time because of maybe like a lack of use.
right, right. I think that will be, unfortunately, something maybe Southwestern Pennsylvanians are used to. And it's,
because
it's like,
because we have to abandon industries
yes,
all at once over time. We're
yeah,
very used to what a thing used to be.
right, right. And unfortunately, that can end up being a beneficial thing. Like look at Hazelwood Green, look at along the riverfront in Lawrenceville in the Strip District. Over time, this area has found ways to turn these previously industrial spaces into what we have now, which are like tech spaces that propel the economy forward. But I think in the interim, it's going to be a financial burden to, Southwestern PA and Pittsburgh if it happens to be that we do end up with stranded assets due to data centers.
So a lot to figure out, and a lot of pressure, it sounds like, on folks to get this right now, to figure it out so that the rest of us can thrive.
For sure.
Hi, I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, a podcast network that includes this show you're listening to, and also 12 other CityCasts in 12 other cities. And each one knows their city as well as your local team knows yours. So isn't it time we connected them? Don't you want to know how they're tackling their bike lane problems and housing challenges and sidewalk dog poop crises? That's why I'm hosting a new podcast called Your City Could Be Better. Because it could be. Every week, I'll chat with a different host in our CityCast network about what their cities are doing right and wrong, the weird things they're trying, and the surprising successes, so that we can all learn how to make our cities a little bit better. Listen to Your City Could Be Better on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
So another story that you did, Mia, for this America 250 project looked at robotics, like this industry and its startup culture and some of the pitfalls it's been experiencing, kind of looking back, but also imagining the future. I feel like that's the whole industry, right? Is like imagining the future. I did not realize, and this is my fault because I have been to the Science Center, I have seen the receipts, but Pittsburgh's been building robots in some form for close to a century. So tell us just a little bit about the old days, like some of the earliest models and what they were used for.
Yeah, I loved working on this story in part because it made me go into the history of Westinghouse, which, funny enough, my great-grandfather worked there. And so when I was going through this story, I was like, whoa, I have a connection.
Oh, that's so cute. Did he build robots or was he like an elevator guy? Like what was his jam?
He didn't build robots, but it was still a cool connection that I told people in my newsroom about.
Amazing.
But yeah, so about 100 years ago, a Westinghouse engineer named Roy Wensley creates this device that initially has a very practical and industrial use. It essentially switches circuits on and off remotely using voice control. And I say this had a practical use because they could use it in a manufacturing setting. But as kind of a marketing tool, they give it this humanoid body. And instead of working in a manufacturing setting, they market it as something that can work in the household and switch your oven on and off, switch your lights on and off according to your voice. And so that robot's name was Herbert Televox, and the engineers at Westinghouse went on to develop several more. They go market it at the World's Fair in 1939 in New York City. And that's kind of how Pittsburgh's robot history forms. And then we obviously fast forward about 60 years. We have CMU professor Red Whitaker. He takes the remote reconnaissance vehicle down to the flooded basement of a reactor on Three Mile Island. And that propels this whole new industry of field robotics, of robots traveling over tricky terrain and, being used in
everything for everything.
Yeah, a lot of things.
Mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I feel like Red Whitaker in particular, like, God, what a hero for Pittsburgh robotics this dude has become. Much older now, but like is really one of the grandfathers of self-driving, like was involved in some of the earliest DARPA challenges with the Department of Defense, has now created stuff that has literally gone to the moon. He's just like has this enormous body of work. But I feel like it's his legacy and so many others that has created this idea that Pittsburgh is responsible, should be proud of its ability to invent things. And we are still the headquarters for so many companies that are really household names all over the world, like Westinghouse. But it makes me wonder, like, is that still true? Is it still a thing that Pittsburgh can give birth to a thing and then it stay here and thrive? You know what I mean? Without having to like go to Cupertino or somewhere else to find its home, its venture capital, and then be able to take off.
A lot of the sources that I spoke to for this story, I think they would tell you that Pittsburgh is still a place to be in a lot of ways. We are home to hundreds of startups that work in deep tech, so smart systems and artificial intelligence and so on. But to your point, there are a lot of challenges associated with that. And one of those happens to be the availability of venture capital in Pittsburgh. And so a lot of the times, if a startup starts in Pittsburgh, it may not stay here because it needs more capital. Or another aspect of this story was that if it's not capital, then it's space. And so if you need to test some robot that does need to go over tricky terrain and you don't have the availability here, whether that be because of money or it be just because the space isn't available, then you do have to go to somewhere like Texas or another state to do that.
What are we missing that companies sometimes do have to make that leap? They have to go somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, one of those things is venture capital, I would say. Another one of those things would be the availability of business partnerships. And so obviously a startup is a business at the end of the day. And so you want that business to, at least the sources that I spoke to said that for a business to be viable, it needs to be able to operate in a market. But if that market isn't saying, hey, we want to use your products, then it kind of puts you at a standstill and you do need to go somewhere else in order to make your business model viable. And so I think that is the second aspect to that.
I think that does make sense. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the difference between like your standard small business, like someone who puts out their shingle on Main Street to do a thing or works from home, right? Versus a quote unquote startup? Like, how do their goals differ a little bit? Because I feel like I learned a lot from your story in terms of why they're different at all.
That's a good question. I would say the way I think about a small business is you can actually be funded sort of like in the same way as a startup would, in the sense that even a startup can be funded by friends and family. I feel like most of the small business owners that I know that have a mom and pop shop, it's just, hey, got a few $100,000. Well, not a few $100,000. That's kind of a crazy number to get from like a grandpa. Yeah.
That's not what everybody gets to start with, but yeah.
Right. But, they get some funding from friends, from family.
Maybe a bank loan, something.
Right. I would say, the main difference between a mom and pop shop that you may see in your neighborhood versus the startups that we're talking about in Pittsburgh is that they have a product that I think maybe businesses don't fully know how to use yet. So an artificial intelligence-based product or a robotics-based product. And to an extent, the businesses in your business ecosystem have to be prepared to take that in. Whereas, like, if you open a bagel store, I know what a bagel is. I'm certainly going to go to your mom and pop shop and buy one.
Yeah, I don't have to describe the concept of a bagel to you for you to know whether this is for you or not.
And so I think that's one aspect to it. And obviously, you wouldn't need an incredible amount of capital to start up a bagel store in the same way that maybe you need a lot of capital to start up a robotics business that requires a lot of modeling and manufacturing and development and deployment.
The other thing was that the end goals are pretty different too. Like a mom and pop, a small business, like as long as you're making more money than you're spending, you can pay your employees, you can hopefully pay yourself, you're doing okay. And that may be enough for you for years, for decades even. But with a startup, there's this goal called an exit that I had heard these terms, but I had really never thought about what the heck they meant. If folks are like me, where they've done that, please explain why an exit is such an important milestone for these folks.
Yes. An exit is essentially when a startup is leaving the startup phase. So you've either been acquired by another company or you've done a public offering. And so Anthropic, SpaceX, I know we've been hearing about their IPOs recently. So that's another way to exit. But essentially, it just means to exit the startup phase. And it's important because even though we know of Anthropic and SpaceX as huge companies, for a smaller startup, it's a signal that you can successfully operate in a business market. You're no longer testing the waters, so to speak. You've managed to prove that this is a viable business model and it's now able to be acquired or go to public offering and the shares can be sold.
Yeah. And I mean, on the smaller level too, the thing that I found fascinating was that like, and I've experienced this personally, like, your early employees, for example, to get in good talent, maybe you can't offer the most competitive salary, but you could offer stock, like future stock, promises of things like that, which means that everyone who's working there is now invested in this thing really succeeding so that someday what you banked on, what you bet on pays off for you.
Right. Definitely.
I mean, what could Pittsburgh be doing to help startups kind of make that leap from viable potential to, quote unquote, exiting and then continuing to do business here in the city?
One thing I heard time and again was that Pittsburgh needs more venture capital within the Pittsburgh area.
We need more rich people here. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so. Yeah, I've heard that quite a bit. And
rich people willing to spend their money. We should qualify that.
Right, exactly. And so even just last year, Pittsburgh had about $23 million on hand for local venture capital supply. But 10 years ago, it had $140 million on hand. So I think that just shows the difference in Pittsburgh alone. And then to think about, we're obviously not at the scale of somewhere like San Francisco adds another element to that. And so I think that's definitely one aspect that could help. Another aspect that could also help, which doesn't always apply to all startups because, for example, if you are a software company, you have much different needs than a robotics company that may need a larger space, may need a build out that is a little bit more different than just a desk and a computer in a room.
Yeah, so something conducive to research and development, that kind of thing, testing.
Yeah, right. So much more like affordable. I've heard the need for affordable options for these types of businesses to have space in Pittsburgh and do their operations would also help.
To your point, we talked earlier about like old things becoming new again. I mean, like self-driving car testing spaces, for example. I think that one that's over in Hazelwood Green has been owned or leased by at least 3 different companies at this point, that testing track. So like these things, once they're built out, can be passed along from company to company and, at various stages of their development.
Yeah. I will say, though, the one thing that I've also heard is that places like Hazelwood Green, it's expensive. And if you're a small spin out from CMU and you don't have that much venture capital, well, maybe you're not going, and you also want to separate yourself from your academic institution, you may not find yourself at Hazelwood Green. But if you don't find yourself at Hazelwood Green, then where do you go? I think that has been a challenge for small startups in Pittsburgh.
Do you find that, companies want to be more centrally located, especially the ones that spin out of our universities, like, Oakland, the Strip District, Lawrenceville, like it seems like a lot of folks land there. I mean, I don't know if that's because that's where they want to be or if because proximity is the ideal. Do you have any sense of like why these neighborhoods have popped off versus others?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's necessarily a strong desire to be in a place like Oakland.
Or you just know Oakland. This is your neighborhood, so you notice if there's like a spot available.
Right. I think that the proximity in Oakland is a major driver of startups finding their place there. I talked to some folks who said that a lot of the founders that they work with are still going to school, and so being near CMU or being near Pitt is just the more ideal option as opposed to being somewhere like Lawrenceville or the Strip District. Now, on the other hand, if you're a more mature startup and you no longer have students going to CMU or Pitt, but you have maybe some folks at your startup who have families and you've moved out to the suburbs, well, that's not a very ideal commute to have to go to Oakland every day. Maybe you'd much prefer to go to the North Side, or you'd prefer to go to the Strip District or Lawrenceville. And also those places can provide a little bit more space if you have been able to find yourself to grow over a few years, as opposed to somewhere like Oakland, which actually a lot of the larger spaces are owned by the universities. And so what's left are smaller spaces, which are more ideal for a small startup. But if you've grown, you want to travel a little bit farther away from there.
Well, so let's zoom out, I guess, a little bit. Like it sounds like we have a healthy startup community. but we don't always foster them to exit in the way that would be ideal. I mean, what do you think the missing piece could be? Or is there one, say for like the focus of your story, 10 to 20 to 50 years, where are we going to be? Are we going to pick it up? Are we going to figure out how to offer more VC, more affordable real estate? Or I don't know, is this just like the challenge for now?
Based on the conversations I've had throughout reporting on this story, I think that is the ultimate challenge right now. I don't see the venture capital, the availability of it changing in Pittsburgh over at least the near term. But I do think it is on people's minds, and certainly the people that are prominent in this world are thinking about it and know that it's a challenge. And so if those minds can come together and say like, hey, how do we solve this issue?
Yeah.
Maybe by the time we hit the 50-year mark, then we will see a change.
Just a cool 50 years, Mia, when you and I are like chumming it up at the old folks' home.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I think in the near term, I think that's definitely a challenge that we're still facing. And I don't think, based on the interviews I've had, there's no clear answers on how to increase that availability of funds for these startups.
Well, let's assume that that's true, that like we don't increase availability, that like we stay kind of in this, I don't know, middle ground space maybe where we are. Do you get the sense from folks that a changing reputation is a bad one? Like instead of being like the place for invention, like our old reputation, if we shifted to one that was maybe more aligned with manufacturing, deployment, like the basic operations of keeping a thing going instead of necessarily giving birth to it. Is that a bad thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing at all. Actually, I think that people are more so saying that the balance is off right now. And so a place like San Francisco would have more of a balance of not only invention, but deployment and manufacturing and business activity around businesses that used to be startups. Whereas in Pittsburgh, that balance is off, and we need to have more of an alignment of these different facets of building a startup and bringing it to the exit and having it operate as a proper business.
Mia, I appreciate it. Thank you for your reporting. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you.
That is all for today on CityCast Pittsburgh. If y'all came out to our big bridge party, if you met us at Open Streets on Sunday, we are so grateful. It's always so amazing to be out in community, and we have loved every second of hanging out with our neighbors, with folks who are new to the CityCast Pittsburgh experience, and with anyone who wandered by dressed as Andy Warhol. Y'all are the best. We will be back tomorrow with more from around the city. We'll talk to you soon. Herbert looks like sort of somewhere between like the Tin Man and like, what was her name? Rosie from the Jetsons.
Oh, yeah.
This big, huge chest and what looks like a piano keyboard, like right there in the center, depending on which model you're looking at. He's a behemoth little dude. And then there's a robot dog here too.
Oh, yeah. And then some of the later iterations, they're not called Herbert Televox, but there are some later iterations that are larger. And they remind me of that old Disney movie, The Iron Giant.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chest is definitely Iron Giant. And the head is somehow like sort of a tea kettle, but weirder.
Right, yeah.